Well, hello everyone. This is the official first Zoomcast brought to you by Wyfer Taylor Preston, and our theme is Association Building Community. And this year, we are going to build on a theme in particular that is Association Building Community globally. So today, I have a special guest here, Steve Basart. And the two of us met at ASA's International Section Council, which apparently has a new name now. But Steve is based in Beijing right now, and he is finally home in Beijing these days. So why don't I turn the camera now to Steve so he can introduce himself and we can get the program started.
Hi, Dorothy. Thank you. Yeah, it's my honor to be part of the third Zoomcast. I didn't know this was an actual term, but a nice way to coin this virtual podcast on Zoom. But yeah, my name is Stephen Basart, as you said, and we did meet at the International Section Council back then, which now officially is called the International Association Advisory Council of ASE. So I am the current chair there, and as you said, it was quite a year and quite a journey back to China here. I did make it back here after spending several months in Europe. And it's great to be back here with the team and enjoying our virtual conversation today.
So building on our theme, I know Steve has tremendous experience in the at the location in Kellen's office in Beijing, but generally also helping association building their community in Asia Pacific region. So why don't we start with sharing some success stories, probably some recent ones that is fun, exciting, and interesting. So if Steve, you can just start with sharing some stories, that would be great.
Sure. No, I'm happy to talk a bit about, as you said, with our team here in China, we do service European as well as American associations throughout Asia. So we have a very much an Asia Pacific focus, but obviously we are here in China, and it's a major market. So we're servicing both professional societies as well as trade associations. In terms of successes, it really depends on what type of organization you are, who your members are, and what you're looking for in terms of delivering here to value to your members. So, I mean, there's a lot we can talk about, maybe a few more specific questions, but anything ranging from setting up really good quality leadership councils that represent the industry, that represent the profession, to online initiatives on WeChat. And there's a lot we can talk about there. But yes, what do you want to know, Dorothy?
Well, actually, now that you gave a background description, I do have one specific question, and I get that quite frequently. So let's say a US-based association wants to start some kind of presence in China, or they want to explore potentially the China market. What would be your advice for them based on what you've seen? If they are not sure about their budget, they're not sure about their community, they may have one or two members who's expressed interest to, welcome to the Greater China region, for example. What are your tips and recommendations for associations who are observing the China market but are not quite sure yet?
Yeah, well, I think you need to be very deliberate about your strategy. So if it's just one chair saying, hey, I really think our association needs to be in China, and we all know that chairman or the president or your regional advisor who's very passionate about his own region or sees this opportunity and wants to push it and push the agenda for the organization in the region. If that's the case, and if there's actually not much of value that you can provide, or if there's not much market opportunity, I'd say maybe let that ship sail, right? So one of the first things that I always advise our associations that we deal with here is to really do your homework before you embark on such a journey, right? So really research, first of all, a little bit of market research, right? Is there a market for your association? Is there a potential group of professionals or a group of companies that you can service here? And then secondly, really look at what is your value proposition. And that's where oftentimes associations, once you go to that next step and you've analyzed, yes, there is a opportunity. Yes, China is such a big market, or yes, our profession is growing in China, etc. Then it's really looking at what value can you provide with your association, and what does it take to create that type of value in the region. So obviously, if we're talking about, there's currently a lot of programs or benefits, credentials that is available in the US that is directly applicable to China. You may have a very low threshold to just jumping in and trying things out. But if you very soon realize that, well, actually everything needs to be tailor-made, the language is a challenge, all those kind of things, you may have to be more deliberate about a strategy, what type of finance and resources will it take. So I guess it's a little bit of an evasive answer, but really going into that marketing or that market research, really going into your value proposition, and then coming up with a strategic plan. You know, what is your entry strategy? What are the resources available to your organization to back that up? And then proceeding with that. And if you need anyone in the country, I'm happy to work with you on that.
Well, speaking of the entry strategy, I am recalling quite a few times where some of my clients, they were approached by either some kind of quasi-government or official or quasi-state-owned organization of some sort, inquiring proactively to our client who they haven't had any experience in China, but they get a knock on the door. So this is when U.S. association could be a little nervous, but then they also love the opportunities. So is this a common scenario where the government or some quasi-government agency might be interested in some particular area and actually reach out? And if that's the case, what would be your recommendation from your perspective?
Yes, yeah.
Should you say yes? Should you, again, continue to do your homework? What's the advice here?
Yeah. So no, I think that's a really good question. And, you know, coming to your first point where you said some quasi-government official or a government organization, we have a term for that here in China. It's called a gongo. So we actually have government organized non-governmental organization, and that probably sounds like something that cannot be possible, but it's something that's the reality here. So there, you know, if we're looking at the nature of associations in China, traditionally, and actually not only in China, also Japan, Korea, and a lot of Asian countries, traditionally, the way that associations were formed or managed is very different from the US associations, European associations. So it's typically been part of government departments, falling under the government authority, being staffed and funded by the government, etc. We have seen a lot of reform actually in the last 10 years here, particularly in China, but also in some of the other Asia Pacific countries. But you know, purely speaking from the China perspective now, associations have gone through reform. A lot of local governments. So again, talking a bit about the vastness of the country itself. A lot of local governments have their own government agendas and work with their local associations, their local academic institutes, etc., to kind of find out what international organizations can support those government agendas. So there's a lot of different, throughout the different regions of the different cities, the different provinces, a lot of activities within these gongos, within these associations, within these academic institutes that closely collaborate with or communicate with the government officials about, which organizations can we bring in from a global level. So you do see that, trade delegations going to the US or professional delegations going to the US or Europe, they will often include scholars, officials that are related to a gongo or to an association from either a national level, provincial level, or even municipality level association. So, and it's often very tricky to find out who are these people, what is their organization, and what type of interest do they represent. So yes, I think, a long story to your simple question, but it will take a lot of homework, because what we always say is that, before you really dive into a partnership with someone who really sounds like your partnership. I mean, obviously, if you are the dental association, if you now start communicating with the Chinese Dental Association, you think like, oh, but they are the Chinese Dental Association, we're the US Dental Association. But there's more behind that, because you
Right.
really need to understand, what are their objectives, how do they operate, what are they interested in as a organization, and why are they reaching out to you? So yeah, this probably leads to more questions, right?
Well, so I think the key is you get an email. What do
Hmm.
you do? Like, is
Hmm.
it doing your Google and noticing there could be some language challenge?
Hmm.
Some of,
Yeah, so
yeah, I do
I would,
think
yeah, yeah.
Googling could, it's not always easy to find
Hmm.
out information about whoever sends you the email. So what would
Sure,
you,
yeah.
other than
Yeah, no,
calling your
definitely.
office, I mean,
Yeah,
what are
other
the
than
other
calling
things?
my office, which
Right.
obviously is the best thing to do here, and you can definitely Google and find out, do your just, and maybe Google is just too simplistic, but really do some desk research, right? If you get an email from person A, B, or C, look them up on LinkedIn, look their organization up on Google. Is there any information available that kind of explains what their organization stands for? And then, I mean, if your organization does interact with the region, so whether that's China, Japan, Korea, and you're interested in that region for pragmatical reasons, why not engage in that conversation, right? Try to find
Mhm.
out a little bit more, send a few specific questions. And, oftentimes these answers that will come back may be very broad and general. And what we typically find, especially when it comes to preliminary meetings, it takes a lot of um, preparation to meet up with these people for the first time. But then when you do meet up, it can still be very general, unless you have a clear sense of direction. What does your organization want from them, and what do they
Mhm.
want from you? So it will be a very delicate dance. Both parties dancing around each other for a while, unless there is a very specific objective. So yeah, no, Googling them, doing a little bit of research. But I would also recommend, so if you do have members in the region, if you do have leadership, or if you do have friends in the region,
Mhm.
that may be able to provide a little background on the organization or the individual, engage with them, try to find out through them, through their networks, what, are they, can you find out more about the individual, the organization,
Mhm.
but also, are they supporting some clear policy objectives of, the city that they come from, or the province that they come from, etc. Because if you're able to understand what is the mission of the delegation they're on, what are their policy priorities, or what is their reason for really coming and visit, then you'll have more opportunity to have a meaningful conversation.
Right. And
Yep.
speaking of delegation, I do notice that seems to be probably the number one most popular way to start, or it seems
Yes.
like requesting for a delegation is almost always the first ask.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
relating to the situation we're in right now, and for whoever is watching 5 years down the road, we're in 2020. So there's a pandemic going on. And I know that in Asian culture, you always say when you meet in person, you immediately increase the relationship.
Mm.
So now that it is difficult to meet in person due to travel restrictions for the pandemic, how have you seen community continue to build despite the challenges? Are there
Mm.
alternatives that's been successfully working for the clients you've been working with?
Yeah. No, maybe before I'll dive into that community building, I want to underline what you just said about, delegations. And, that's part of the reason why you see them reaching out to the organization again. They want to make that personal connection and find out what's the opportunity, but also it's the relationship building. And I think it goes both ways. We often advise our associations that, you have to have commitment from your senior leadership to make frequent visits to the region, to really, if you do have partners here, local counterpart associations you work with, they do need to maintain that relation and come over once a year, and let your local staff plan a whole itinerary with meetings, dinners, lunches, activities, etc., to really have that high level maintaining that relation. Because as you said, in the culture here, it's important to meet in person and to have that mutual trust. And but yeah, going to your other question, because
Right.
we do live in very different times now, and obviously travel is very difficult. As I said, I mean, I just made my journey back here to China just 3 weeks ago, and the whole process of going through a 14-day quarantine is prohibiting people from traveling the way we were used to, and that applies to most countries in this region. So not only China, but if you're looking at Japan, Korea, Singapore, etc., there's a lot of restrictions on inbound travel, strict quarantines, and that limits your ability to be there in person and make that connection, which is typical in culture. So what we've seen with some of our clients, because we obviously do represent in country for many of the associations we work with. So we've seen an increase in requests for our staff to represent them at a higher level and meet with the counterparts, because within the country borders here, a lot of things, a lot of activities, businesses have resumed, and people are available to meet in person again and have that relation. So we do see that part of the relationship building and the community building again, with us being the staff on the ground to do that. Maybe to talk a bit about something different as well, apart from us being kind of the extension of the association and being able to work within the country's boundaries. We also see a lot of obviously on the virtual side, and even before the pandemic started, I think for those that are watching 5 years from now, you realize that the pandemic has created this huge change for a lot of associations in Europe and the US when it comes to making that shift to going virtual with a lot of meetings. But essentially over the last 3 years in China, we've already seen a lot of revolution going on when it comes to WeChat. So if 5 years down the road WeChat still exists, and you know what we're talking about, but if you don't, it's essentially one big platform that combines everything, the communications, so sending text messages, being able to order your cab, connecting, making payments, everything is consolidated here in one big platform, and many organizations are using that as a platform to interact with their members. So creating WeChat communities, having virtual groups there, WeChat groups, to interact with the members, communicating, doing discussions and questions and virtual meetups, but also using official accounts to actually push out information directly to the members on their cell phone. So probably 5 years down the road, that won't sound too impressive, but when I did mention that to colleagues in the US 3 years ago, they're like, wow, your association, you're telling me that your association members are going onto their cell phone and are directly asking questions from their cell phone to your staff live in the office. So that seemed very, high tech back then.
So on that point, another question that I get quite frequently is about the language barrier in general. Yeah. Typically, for potentially Chinese members, there's a lot of them. Mm-hmm. So there's always a question as to pushing out content in Chinese, accessible mm-hmm. to the community members based in China, or read Chinese. So mm-hmm. what is your recommendation as to, is this a must in your opinion, or does it depend? And what are the metric points if an association is considering using or creating content in Chinese, or translating their current mm-hmm. content into Chinese? What's your thought, and what have been people doing to engage members in China?
Yeah. So is it a must? Well, I would say yes and no. Okay. Obviously, if resources are no issue for your organization, and we all would love to live in a world where budget would not be an issue, but really looking at your local value proposition or your delivery, your member value delivery. Obviously, if you're able to communicate directly with your members in their native language. If all the resources would be available in their native language, you know, tailor to the local circumstances. So some of your professional standards in the US may be different from here. So if you're able to transform that and recognize, okay, if we alter the content because this is the local circumstances in China or Japan or Korea, obviously that will resonate the best with your members. So is it a must? I would prefer to say yes, but obviously in reality, a lot of our associations don't have all the resources to commit to that, right? So you really need to look at what are the low-hanging fruits, what can you afford at this stage, what can you do that makes the biggest impact. So if, you know, and it really depends on your profession or your industry, because the proficiency of English will depend on, you know, if you're working with an industry that's very international, there's a lot of exchange, your professionals are highly trained, obviously have international experiences, probably having resources in English available is not that big of an issue, right? So maybe it will just take a step of creating a Chinese framework of the message with a link to all the scientific documents in English to it. But of course, since, I mean, there's a lot of research going on in China, if your profession or your industry is operating in a space where China is actually, you know, in the top tier, you may need to look at how do you bring in those Chinese academia, or, you know, how do you bridge the cultural gap, the language gap, and be cognizant of the fact that, you know, things will be different in a profession here, and, you know, things need to be tailored. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but it's a kind of a yes or no answer.
And it really is, it almost depends on the membership as well. So if there's any factors to consider.
Yeah, it depends on your membership. And of course, I mean, if we all have unlimited budgets, we can dream as much as we can, but if not, we have to be realistic. And, you know, again, taking a step back, look at who are your members, what will work for them in terms of language, and then looking at your profession, what is needed to actually provide a valuable program in the region, etc. Yeah.
So another question that I am curious about, especially because I'm talking to a professional here, is about good governance structure, or like you mentioned earlier, an intentional cultivation of an organization direction. So if you want to enter the Chinese market or really get into Asia Pacific market, is to be strategic. Just, you don't go because you feel like you should go. So have you seen any organization that has interesting structure that they intentionally create to cultivate the community building effort or in the region to bring
definitely.
US
No, and you know, to your point of, you know, we shouldn't just go there because we're going there, right? I mean, looking at 15 years ago, everyone was talking about, oh, we need to be in China. No one really knew why. I think we're in a different part of the curve now, and organizations are starting to look at China and other parts of the world critically and saying, do we need to be there and why, right? So being very deliberate about that and understanding, when we do make this type of investment from the association side, why are we doing it, and what does success look like? And, you know, success will look may look very different from the US. You know, there may be different metrics that you need to apply, and when it comes to things like membership activities, etc. But yeah, sorry, I'm derailing the question a little bit, but going back to your initial question. So what on the governance side are associations doing that really helps with that, or is kind of like a best practice, right? And I think, again, we've seen for most of our clients that have been very successful in the region is that you have some type of a regional body, a council, or a task force or a working group where you're able to bring in actual members, experts, leaders from your industry, to participate in the organization. So we have organization with Asia councils, obviously the ones that we work with across the Asia or Asia Pacific region. They will have regional, you know, region-wide representation. Greater China if it's more focused on the China region itself, but really making sure that you have those experts, the members on the association, that they're able to share their insights. They're able to tell you what is different on this side of the world, and why would a program from the US work or not work here, and what needs to be different. They'll be able to tell you to what extent is language an issue. Essentially, they can be your sounding board. They can provide you their professional expertise and help to guide the organization as you're embarking on any activities in this region. And of course, if you're truly global as an association, you sooner or later also hope to have representation of the industry on your global board, or at least on a higher level. So being able to create a path for your members where they can see, well, we can get involved with the organization. You'll be able to guide them and train them on, what is it like to be a volunteer leader in the organization? Because particularly, I mean, going back to one of our first points in our conversation today, the way associations are managed on this side of the world can be very different. And a lot of members who may not have that volunteer experience in a US type or European type association may not understand, or may have a very different understanding of what is it like to be a volunteer leader. A lot of Chinese associations, Japanese, Korean associations, I can tell you, the volunteer leadership role is very symbolic. It's essentially, getting that nice badge on your shirt, and you're getting that because you are one of the most esteemed leaders, but you're just lending your brand to the associations. And, apart from a few nice dinners and, occasionally giving your opinion, there's not much participation that may actually be needed from your side. But obviously that's different for US associations, European associations, and it will depend on your governance structure. But being able to create that pathway for your volunteer leaders, and being able to teach them about your volunteer culture and creating that pathway will be equally important for your organization.
Well, I think that is a great point. Why don't we close on one thing that, given the fact that both of us have a legal background, Steve actually is a lawyer by training as well, and I only know it because we're good friends, but I think it would be doing him injustice if we don't mention the NGO law in China. So that's also, I work on it a fair amount too. So we collaborated before, but why don't you do it as a concluding point for associations, nonprofits, considering going into China in particular, because they may not know. For those who are already in China, I'm sure you already know. But for people who are thinking about it, what's the top 2, top 3 points that associations and nonprofit organizations should keep in mind about the legal compliance component?
Yes. So going back to your initial point, right, like building community in China, I think, yes, the FNGO law, especially if you're operating within mainland China, is very important, because according to the laws, as long as you're a non-mainland, non-government, non-profit organization that actually has an activity in China, you're required to comply with the FNGO law. So, yes, when we're talking about letting a community drive itself, or having leaders be involved, etc., you want to make sure that it's carefully coordinated, so that whenever you're organizing an activity that will fall under the FNGO law, you're sure that steps are being taken to comply with that. So that will require, if you do have an activity in China, that you either file for temporary activity, so you will need to find a Chinese partner, so and work with that partner on creating temporary filing, or, as you said, if you're here on a more permanent basis, you will need to work with a professional supervisory unit, PSU, and register for a rep office to have that formal legal compliance. So, I mean, perhaps one takeout, and that's, even prior to the FNGO law taking effect here in China, we've always said to our clients, coming back to the relationship building and the local circumstances here in the region, not only for China, but across the region, it's very important to work with your local counterparts. So building partnerships, building relationships with local counterparts is essential for a successful strategy in this part of the world. And now with the FNGO law, that's even more important, because you, as soon as you're going into the realm of organizing activity here, you will be required to work with a partner to do a temporary filing or to register for a rep office. And if you do not have those relationships, it will take substantial time. And again, going back to the high level relationship building, it takes sometimes years to get to a level where both partners really understand what the organizations from both sides are looking for, what their organizational objectives are, what their kind of like their corporate culture is like, and where they find their space to collaborate together. So if you're ahead of that, and if you do have solid partnerships that would be able to support you with these aspects of the FNGO law, you obviously have a step ahead when you do have the need to work with them. So yes, a key takeout there is really, make sure that you do have a deliberate strategy of developing relations, developing high-level visits once we can visit again, or working with partners in the country to create those relationships, so that once you do need to tap into these relationships, you have them.
Well, that is very, very helpful. So we hope you enjoyed well, Steve, first of all, thank you for joining, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Pleasure. And for those watching the program, I hope you enjoy the program, and feel free to, we will leave our contact information, both Steve and myself. So if you have any other questions, especially about building community in the Greater China region, Asia Pacific region, feel free to reach out. So thank you very much.
Thank you.